On this episode, we're going to be talking about securing your e-commerce store, especially if you're running Shopify or BigCommerce. You don't want to miss this one, so do stay tuned. With Black Friday and the Cyber Week, sales event coming through very soon, which is just around the corner, I really wanted to talk about security, because we normally just talk about the sales, what marketing and sales are going to look like. But what about the entire infrastructure that your site sits on? What if something happens? What if you make changes that you need to sort of, roll back to? Unfortunately, platforms like BigCommerce and Shopify do not provide backups. They do provide exports and imports, features which can, cause errors. So, that's why you really need a backup. So I got one of the founders and the CEO of Rewind, who are a sponsor to this podcast, on to the podcast, Mike Porter. And we discussed security in all ramifications. So this does not necessarily apply to the fact that, okay, you only run Shopify. You could be running Magento, but some of the tips he had, all of the tips he had essentially in this episode really cover security in a wider sense of it in the e-commerce industry. So platform level security, best practices is what we really discussed. It's a great episode you want to listen to if you want to get ahead of what security should look like with e-commerce moving forward. Enjoy the episode, and I will catch you on the other side. Cheers. Welcome to the 2x e-commerce podcast show, and this is the podcast dedicated to rapid growth in online retail. I'm your host, Kunle Campbell, and if you're looking to grow metrics such as conversions, repeat customers, average order value, traffic, and ultimately sales, I think you're tuned into the right podcast, because I try my best to handpick experts, entrepreneurs, practitioners, on here to share their knowledge so you could apply to any challenges you're facing in your direct-to-consumer e-commerce business. Speaking of which, on today's episode, I'm joined by Mike Porter. He is a co-founder, CEO of Rewind. Now, you will know Rewind if you're a regular listener, because they're a sponsor of this podcast. And they essentially provide backup solutions to Shopify, BigCommerce, and QuickBooks, to QuickBooks. And essentially, you think these platforms actually have backups, but this is why Rewind is there. And what we want to talk about today is Black Friday is around the corner in just a few weeks, and just ensuring security and the backup of your store is essential. So we're going to talk about protecting your store in prep for Cyber Week, as well as beyond Cyber Week. So I think I'm babbling too much. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mike to the show. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Kunle. Nice to be here.
Before we kick off today's show, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Did you know that cloud-hosted e-commerce platforms like Shopify and BigCommerce do not provide automatic backups? Rewind steps in to protect Shopify and BigCommerce stores with automatic backups. Rewind is trusted by over 25,000 stores. Install Rewind and get to test it for free over 7 days. And to extend the 7-day trial to 30 days, head over to rewind.io, their website, and mention 2x e-commerce. It's great to have you, but could you take a minute or two to introduce yourself, Rewind, and we'll move from there?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, Rewind's an application to back up your SaaS services. We currently back up Shopify, BigCommerce, and QuickBooks Online, and are looking for other platforms to back up in the near future. We started Rewind in June of 2015. As we were big fans of backup. I've personally lost data in the past and know the pain of logging into a computer and seeing everything and all your hard work disappear. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to build a backup solution for SaaS services, for all the data that's been moving into the cloud. We live in Ottawa. Shopify's in Ottawa. We love what they're doing there. And 5 years ago, we thought the best way to get a job at Shopify would be to build an app. So we built this backup app for Shopify called Rewind. We launched it in June of 2015. That December, one of our customers, just a few weeks before Christmas, actually, based in the UK, they ended up losing all of their products. They were selling kids' shoes and had an integration in with a different application. And that app had a small bug in it and ended up deleting all of the products just a few weeks before Christmas. So I called us up, said, luckily I just installed your application. Can you help me out? And sure enough, we were able to recover his store exactly the way it was before the problem happened.
Incredible.
And since then, we've just grown the company tremendously. We're protecting over 10,000 businesses now on Shopify, over 20,000 businesses in total across the 3 platforms that we're looking at.
Wow.
And we're growing very quickly. So it's been a hell of a ride to tell you that.
It's an incredible backstory, given the fact that it was a side project and it was, you were trying to get to work for Shopify. It's super interesting. It's super interesting. Okay, so let's talk about Shopify. Shopify was founded back in 2006, I believe. Obviously, things are really getting serious in 2010, 2011. So were you in the ecosystem at the time, or was it kind of like a local Ottawa thing to want to get into their ecosystem? Were you building a store yourself, or were you supporting? What was life like before Rewind?
I've never so we weren't building a store at that time, but I used to run a curling website. So I'm a big curler, if you're familiar with curling. And a long time ago, I was selling curling gloves on the internet. So just as Toby was looking to sell his snowboards, I was doing the same thing, selling curling gloves and experiencing the same pain and problem that he was. So we weren't, I ended up discontinuing that website a few years later as my son was born. So I hadn't done e-commerce in a few years, but really when you're in Ottawa, you couldn't help but notice how successful they were and how fast they were growing. They were everywhere. They were moving buildings downtown every year or so as they were leasing one and then outgrowing it. And so it was clear that there was a huge demand for their product. And we just wanted to be a part of that ride.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, let's jump right into store security. Why? I think the big question I have, because when I learned about Rewind, is why don't cloud-based platforms or solutions such as BigCommerce and Shopify have automatic backups? What's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, so it's very important to note that Shopify and BigCommerce and QuickBooks, they do have backup. So your data is backed up. Your data is backed up. They've got a backup that runs continuously. And if something were to happen to the entire Shopify system, they'd be able to recover your data the way it was before that problem happened. So if something happened to the data center where your data is being stored, absolutely Shopify would help recover that, assuming the whole system went down. But the thing that they won't do, and really what most SaaS providers won't do, Shopify or BigCommerce or QuickBooks, none of them are unique in this. They won't go into that backup and help just you. That backup is for them. That protects their business, right? They're not responsible for protecting your business. You're responsible for protecting your business. So their backup is kind of like an all or nothing sort of thing. If they need the whole backup to restore the whole data system, it comes back in. But if one store has a problem, if your store has a problem, they won't go into that backup and recover just the few pieces of information that you need. So if something happens to a few products, you can't call customer support and say, listen, I've just deleted a few products. Do you mind going into your backup and recovering my products? It would literally be like finding a needle in a haystack, right? They've got billions of products that are backed up. and you need to recover 3 or 5 or 10 or 100 or whatever it is.
Yeah, makes sense.
What Rewind does is provide that account level backup. It's a backup for your data to protect your business in case something happens in the cloud, whether that be through a human error. Store owners are working late hours, sometimes with many employees. Those people make mistakes. We protect that from mistake. We protect the store from those mistakes. Whether it be a third-party app, some of these apps occasionally have problems with their integrations and cause issues in the store. We can recover from that. We've seen some instances of malicious intent, where you've got a business relationship with a third-party developer, potentially a business partner. Something happens to that relationship and the other person goes in and purposely goes to cause problems in your store by either deleting products or collections or orders or customers. Those are the types of events that Rewind helps protect against, that Shopify's backup or QuickBooks backup or BigCommerce's backup, any of the SaaS platforms really, they don't provide that account level recovery, which is Rewind's focus.
Well, it's a great clarification as to what they have in place for backing up their entire system, versus account level. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you talked about instances in which you may need a backup, where vital data is missing in a setup, and you will need to roll back to a certain snapshot of your store. Now, beyond that, how do you ensure robust security in your store, especially in fast-growing direct-to-consumer companies that are having lots of employees come in, growing their teams, lots of users into their system? Do you have any guidelines for security, especially in a SaaS-based solution, even in COVID, in a post-COVID scenario where many people are accessing the store remotely, not in your office premises? What tips do you have from your experience and perspective?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first thing you want to do as you're inviting these other users in, as your business is growing and you need other people to have access to your store, you want to make sure that you're only inviting, first of all, the people that really require access to your store. So never invite somebody that shouldn't have access. And when you invite them, make sure that you're giving them the least amount of privilege on your store as possible. So if somebody's only managing orders, for example, they probably don't need access to your product catalog. Don't grant them access to your product catalog. Grant them access to your orders, grant them access to your customers, etc. You can, in Shopify, limit the access that people have to your store. So that's a really important point, right? You don't want to give people access to something that they don't need in order to do their job. I'd actually argue that if you have any questions about what they need, err on the side of caution and provide as little permissions as possible, and then have them do their job and request additional permissions if they encounter any problems, right? Mm-hmm. The guy or woman might be working saying, I need access to this. I can't do my job to refund this customer this order. I need access to this. And then you can go in, you can adjust it so that she can go in and help that customer out. Mm-hmm. So make sure you give them the least amount of permissions as possible.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Is your e-commerce store powered by Magento, BigCommerce, Commerce Cloud, WooCommerce, or a custom CAT platform? Is it slow? Does it have too many fields or involves too many steps to complete a purchase? Enter Bolt. It's the fastest e-commerce checkout in the industry, period. Bolt loads 10x faster than native checkouts with an average checkout duration of just over 30 seconds. Bolt is mobile native with no scroll on mobile screens. It offers a zero fraud guarantee and has 42% fewer fields than native checkouts. Bolt supports Stripe, Apple Pay, PayPal, and several more payment gateways and providers. Bolt helped luxury sunglasses brand Dita reduce checkout abandonment by 32%. which resulted in a 50% conversion rate uplift. Don't lose customers at checkout, use Bolt. Bolt is offering a completely free bottom of funnel checkout audit to 2x e-commerce listeners. Head over to bolt.com/2x to get your free checkout audit now. That's bolt.com/2x.
We also encourage and really highly recommend customers use a password manager. So if you can remember your password for your Shopify store, it's not a secure password. You should not be able to remember the password to log into your Shopify account. You really need to be using a password manager. At Rewind, we use 1Password and recommend that as the sort of gold standard for password managers. But there's other options out there as well, like LastPass, for instance, is another good option. You need to be using a password manager so that each password that you have online is unique. It's extremely difficult to remember, and the password manager allows it to handle these complex passwords. In turn, you want to ensure that your employees are using that same password manager. So typically buying a license for the entire company is good, because if one person has a weak password, you're only as strong as your weakest link in a way. There's something in Shopify called two-factor authentication, which everyone should have enabled on their Shopify account. So two-factor authentication is after you log in, typically you get sent a text message with a 6-digit number, and you have to enter that number in after you log in. So it's a combination of your password and this special code that gets generated. It's typically only valid for about 30 seconds. The nice thing about a program like 1Password, and I believe LastPass does this as well, is they'll generate those two-factor codes for you automatically. So you don't actually need access to your phone in order to log in. You can do it right from your computer. So those, I think from an account perspective, those are really the main ones. From an app perspective, we always recommend that people do their due diligence on any apps that they're installing, right? The apps that you're installing have permission to modify your store. You want to make sure that when you install an app and you look at what it's asking to get access to, that it makes sense. If you're working on an app that you don't think needs access to your product catalog, but when you install it, it's requesting access to your product catalog, maybe an app that you want to take a second look at. You might want to just think twice before installing that. We always recommend that people call the phone number associated with the app, see who calls, see who answers the phone. Is it a 1-800 number or just a developer cell phone number? I think are good indications of whether you're dealing with a real company or whether you're dealing with just a single developer who might not have the same security standards that a larger company might have. Little indications like, is the copyright on their website up to date, are good indications of whether somebody is actively working on their product, right? So if you go to their website and you see copyright in 2018, maybe not the most up-to-date product that you want to be installing. So you just need to be vigilant on the apps, and certainly in all the app stores there are public reviews. You can see how many people have reviewed the app. You should read a few of the reviews and see what people are saying about it. Look at the average rating, and then eventually you make your decision based on a lot of the public information that's out there.
That's some really, really valid points there. I was going to talk to you about app level security because I recall speaking with another colleague in the industry. They manage a portfolio of stores, and he was like, wherever possible, if their team is able to create is able to duplicate the functionality of an app, they will, because it's surprising the amount of data third-party apps seem to request or want to have access to in your Shopify store. So he was talking about stuff like notifications and, the full access, they have in his store, not necessarily for changes, but just their data. They're a bit, paranoid, that third parties have access to their data. What are your thoughts on app security auditing, where you're able to sort of run a comprehensive audit on what apps on the access level to your data apps have? I know you run an app which is very mission critical and will require full security, will require a considerable amount of security, because this is a make or break situation. But what about utility apps that serve one function and just are quite nosy in a way?
That's a good question. So I'll start out by saying I think the idea of building your own app is a terrible idea. I would never recommend anybody do that. I think a lot of effort goes into building an application and keeping it updated, especially as Shopify goes and changes their APIs. And if you're running an e-commerce business, then you're better off investing in the e-commerce business than investing in software developers who are building app functionality. It is always more expensive to build your own app than to license someone else's app and use that. So I'll start off by saying I would totally disagree with that strategy of trying to rebuild functionality. But I think it does bring up a good point of a lot of the apps that you're installing have considerable access to your store, and you need to make sure that your data is protected, right? And that these people who are building the apps also need to make sure that they've got really top level security. At Rewind, we go through regular security audits from our customers and also from third parties to try and poke holes in the security of the app. So I don't think that as a merchant you shouldn't feel like you can't ask those security questions and have a questionnaire that the app developer needs to answer in order to alleviate any of the concerns you have related to security. The data that you have, the products that you're listing, the customer information that you've got, that's the most important data for your business. You need to make sure that that data is protected at all times. And so asking an app developer to explain their security policies, how do they encrypt the data? How do they manage access to the production systems? How do they manage their own passwords? Do they require two-factor authentication when they log in? How often are their passwords rotated? Where's the data stored? In what country? In what locations? In what services? These are all valid questions as an app developer that you can and should go and ask any developer. And if you're not satisfied with the answers, or if they don't respond to you with the answers because they don't have them, then I think that's a good indication that you might want to rethink whether that's a company that you want to partner with. Generally speaking, I think there are very reliable companies that handle almost any functionality that you would want to add to your online store. There's tons of great successful companies out there like Klaviyo, like Privy, like Bold. These companies exist. I think sometimes merchants are looking for the lowest price, and the lowest price does not always equal the best quality, right? At some point, you need to pay for the fact that those apps undergo regular security audits, that their teams are well trained in best practices, etc. That costs money. And so looking for the least expensive app is not the way to success in my mind. Look for the more look for the ones with the higher reputation and the ones who are well established. And I think if you stick with those well established apps, asking any of those questions that I outlined, these developers would be getting those questions all the time. We often have those security surveys that come in from customers asking us those questions, and so those answers from our point of view are ready to go if you ever asked for them. We've also got a web page on our website at rewind.io/security that details all of the security measures that we take. So in some cases, if the app developers are getting that request on a regular basis, they've likely got a public web page that you can visit already that details all of the security measures that they've got.
I'm going to link up to your page, the security one. Okay. So Black Friday is around the corner, and people are thinking about sales. I said the major thrust in everybody's mind right now is, are we going to beat last year? Are we going to beat 2019? What's 2020 going to look like? But what if something devastating happens? Do you have any particular security advice for this Cyber Week coming? Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Klaviyo is a growth marketing platform that powers over 25,000 online businesses. Klaviyo understands every single customer interaction and empowers brands to create more personalized marketing moments. Listen, analyze, and act on your customer data with Klaviyo. Visit klaviyo.com/2x.
So I don't think there's really any difference between what you need to do on a regular basis and what you need to do during Black Friday or Cyber Monday, right? The same advice that we gave earlier about securing your passwords, using two-factor authentication, auditing the apps that you have installed, that all still applies you should be doing it regardless of whatever time of year it happens to be. I think one suggestion would be to really try and limit the changes that you're making to your store. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the pricing changes that might have or the sales that you're gonna launch, but rather, it's probably not a great idea to be installing any new apps starting at the start of November, right? Make sure your store is backed up. So we'll plug Rewind and make sure you install Rewind, but at least a few weeks before, you probably want to start limiting the apps, because those apps, sometimes make changes to your stores that could take a day or two to undo or to make sure that it's working properly, for instance. And so the last thing you want is, on the Thursday before Black Friday, to be installing an app that ends up making some change to your website that causes problems for users in Google Chrome, for instance, and you have to spend a few hours trying to debug what that problem is. You don't need that on the Thursday before Black Friday, right? Yeah. So I would really limit the number of changes that you're making to your store, limit the number of apps that you're installing. At some point, you should implement some sort of freeze on your store and say, look, at this point, we're not going to make any more changes. The apps are the apps. The store is ready to go. It's all set, ready to go. I think the one thing that we do recommend everybody have is a staging environment. There's not a lot of stores that operate in this way, but you should have a second environment that matches your production environment. And so for Shopify-plus customers or BigCommerce enterprise customers, they've got the ability to create second or third or fourth stores at no additional charge. Yeah. Other plans, you need to pay for that other store. But I would argue that even if you're just using it for October, November, December, paying an extra $30 a month for Shopify's cheapest plan, I think BigCommerce is the same price, is a really great investment to test any changes that you're going to make to your online store. And you can use another app that we have called Rewind Copy to clone your production store onto that staging store so that all the data from your production store is loaded into that staging store. And that way you can make changes on the staging store, make sure it's working properly, evaluate everything that you're going to do before you push it live into production. Not a lot of people do that, but I think it's super important, especially if your store is moderately successful. You want to make sure that any change you push into production is not going to cause any major problems. So that'd be one thing that I think a lot of people could work on over the holiday season.
Thank you. It's really, really interesting, and I didn't know about the Rewind Copy app. Your Shopify, your Shopify-plus, recommended, because I have access to some Shopify-plus stores that run Rewind. What are the requirements? What are the app requirements? This is probably off topic, but what are the requirements from Shopify to certify Shopify-plus apps?
Yeah, you go through a certification process that involves a number of different factors. One of the things they look at is customer support. So how quickly do you respond to customer issues? How available is your support staff? So are they, is it a single developer who's managing support in the best of his abilities? Or do you, like Rewind, have a team of people that are available 7 days a week to answer questions when they come in? How quickly do you respond to those issues? So customer support is one. How well does the product scale? Can it handle the level of some of Shopify's largest customers? Very early on, we had some very large brands from Shopify install Rewind. And so we really worked very early on scaling Rewind to make sure that it could handle the largest stores that exist. And these days, like I said earlier, we've got 10,000 customers, some of Shopify's largest brands on there, and we're able to handle that load without any problem. But certainly that's another thing that they're looking at. They do look at the security. So what is the security of the application as well? What are the permissions that your app is requesting? Is that stuff that is actually needed? So there's an extensive process, I'd say, that goes into becoming a certified Shopify-plus app that only a few merchants, that only a few app developers end up qualifying for.
Makes sense. Okay, speaking of which, what does the back end? We keep on talking about Rewind's features and the necessity for an application level or account level backup solution. But what do the back end and your servers look like? I can imagine you have a ton of servers and people to manage it, customer support, account managers. What does it look like at the back end in Rewind? How many people do you have there, and how many servers do you have?
So we're a team of 40 people or so now. We're growing quickly. I think we'd like to be we'll be at 60 within a few months. We see a big opportunity on all the platforms that we're backing up. So like on Shopify, for instance, there's over 1 million merchants. And although we've done very well, we only have 10,000 customers. So there's still a lot of opportunity, I think, for this company to grow. From a technical perspective, I think it really is sometimes overwhelming to think that this company was started with just the two of us working nights and weekends on the product just 5 years ago with a single server in Amazon's cloud to what we've got today. Rewind is fully GDPR compliant. So for our European customers, we run servers in the EU. So all your data is stored and processed in Europe. Data for US customers is stored and processed in the US, and data for the rest of the world is stored and processed in Canada. Each service that we run is independent of each other. So our Shopify backups never interact with our BigCommerce backups. Any issue that we have from a BigCommerce perspective doesn't affect our Shopify customers. Our Shopify product, our backup product, is also separate from our copy product. So the copy infrastructure doesn't affect the backups infrastructure. And so I think at the end of the day, you're looking at hundreds of servers literally all over the world that are handling the Rewind infrastructure. I haven't got a total accurate number, but I think we're running. I believe we're running at least 8 different pods for Rewind throughout the world, and those would each contain multiple servers themselves. The service does scale up and down to handle demand. So it does sort of grow. There are times of the day where it's a bit more busy and the servers get added, and then when the times are less busy, the servers go away. But yeah, there's hundreds of servers that are handling the system in multiple regions throughout the world. It's pretty amazing to think about.
How far back can I, restore a state, a store state?
Yeah, so you can recover back to any state in the last year. Wow. So 365 days of history, and deleted products I believe, are kept for even longer. But you can go back to literally any minute of any day in the last 365 days.
It's real time. It's incredible space, server space. Okay. Right. Okay. We've talked about security, two-factor security, app level security, what you should be doing in your store, privileges, using 1Password, and all that. But a lot of security compromises have been surprisingly human. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Did you know that cloud-hosted e-commerce platforms like Shopify and BigCommerce do not provide automatic backups? Rewind steps in to protect Shopify and BigCommerce stores with automatic backups. Rewind is trusted by over 25,000 stores. Install Rewind and get to test it for free over 7 days. And to extend the 7-day trial to 30 days, head over to rewind.io, their website, and mention 2x eCommerce. So humans, where an employee goes rogue and they put a vulnerability in the system and things just go bad, or they might be upset. Do you have any stories, without mentioning any names, or any scenarios, real life stories to, just get people aware of potential security problem points or pain points, based on humans, on people that work in or with their store?
I think it's important to realize that can happen to any sized company, right? That notion of having an internal employee that wants to cause problems or that may get bribed for causing problems happens to companies of all sizes. So if you recall, just a couple of months ago, Twitter had a major problem where there were posts that were made to really a lot of celebrity accounts. And that attack was actually executed by people internal to Twitter who had access to the admin tool. So you can do all of the things we talked about earlier. You can secure your passwords, you can have two-factor authentication, you can limit your access to the people that need it, you can verify all the apps that you've got. At the end of the day, you can do everything and still end up with some sort of vulnerability, because at the end of the day, people are managing your business, they're managing the store online, and people make mistakes. And so you really need that backup in order to just have that last level of defense and protection. So I think it's important to realize that happens to stores, to companies, not even stores, just to companies of all sizes, including some of the largest tech companies that exist. In terms of stories for us, we've got lots. We hear about these events all the time. Customers email us with some crazy stories sometimes. I know one time we had one customer who had their cat jump on the keyboard while they were editing their store theme. And the cat ended up actually inserting a character in the action on the add to cart button. And if you look through the code, they'd added the letter H, and instead of add to cart, it was add to chart. And so if you had looked through the code, there wouldn't have been a spelling mistake. It wasn't obvious that there was a whole lot of characters that were added. But that one letter resulted in nobody being able to order from that store. The theme had been edited in a way that made the entire store unusable. So that was probably the funniest story I'd heard. We certainly hear, like I said earlier, there's stories of people working with developers, third-party developers who aren't vetted as closely as they should be, and those third-party developers cause problems. So again, we won't name any names, but it's really important that before you get somebody to work on your store, that you know them, that they're trusted, that they come from a referral, just the basic sort of business references that you're going to check, because they're getting access to your store data and they can cause a lot of problems on it. We had that one store earlier in our history of the company that had a third-party app that was syncing inventory, that had a bug in it that ended up deleting all of the products. We see that occasionally where third-party apps do cause problems.
Yeah.
Anytime where you're syncing data is a bit of a problem. So we see that a lot. Importing and exporting CSV files are a godsend for our business, because CSV files are notorious for causing problems. Yeah. It's so easy to cause a problem with an incorrect character or a quote, and things like that. So we see that one on a regular basis as well. I mean, it really, to be honest with you, I don't know if we've seen everything, but we've seen quite a lot, having been in that business of recovering customers' data, and having been in business for over 5 years. We've certainly seen a lot of situations and stuff that I don't think we ever anticipated having to help customers for when we first started in 2015.
Oh, incredible insights! Incredible insights, Mike. I just want to thank you for all of the insights you provided in regards to security and on Shopify and BigCommerce stores. For people interested to finding out more about Rewind, there's the Rewind website. Just go to rewind.io. Do you have any final tips or any parting words before we let you go?
No, I think let's just review what we said earlier about how to secure your store, right? So there's a few steps. So one, make sure your password is unique. Make sure that it's hard to memorize or impossible to memorize. So a password manager tends to be the best way to do that. Use two-factor authentication if you can. There's lots of articles online on how to enable two-factor authentication for whatever platform you're using it, whether it be Shopify, BigCommerce, or QuickBooks, or any other online SaaS service. I would even go as far as to say that any service that you use, if it has two-factor authentication, you should be using it, including and perhaps especially any online banking products that you're using. So two-factor is a really, really good way of limiting the amount of damage that can happen. Vet your apps closely. Make sure the apps that you're using are from a trusted company. And like I said, there's a few easy things you can do to test to see if it's a real company. Phone their phone number, email support, check the copyright on their website, make sure that it's up to date. Little things like that go a long way. You'd be surprised at how many companies you can take out of your consideration just on a few small factors like that. Limit the amount of access that you're giving to people. So if you're inviting third-party people to your store, make sure you're only giving them access to the things that they need. And then lastly, you can do all of that, but at the end of the day, people do make mistakes. Make sure you've got a backup that you can use to restore your data. An export of your data from Shopify is not a backup. A lot of people get confused by that. You need a backup system where it will save your data, but also be able to bring it back. And the export functionality from Shopify only provides you with the data. It doesn't help you bring that data back. Exactly. So make sure that your backup system is a backup system and not simply an export. I think if you do all of that, at the end of the day, you're likely to have very few problems. But if you do, you've always got that last resort of a backup of your data that you can use in case something disastrous happens. And really, if you do that, you should be able to sleep well at night and just focus on increasing your sales and taking care of your customers over the holiday season.
Exactly. For me, it's the cheapest no-brainer insurance policy you should have for the infrastructure that generates, revenue continuously for your business, your store. It's just a no-brainer, to be honest. So Mike, it's been interesting, incredibly helpful. I've learned more than a thing or two with you coming onto the show. I just want to thank you again, and cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Kunle. It was nice meeting you too.